This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
Indeed he does, but not until I've said a few words at the top of the show. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. Weird day today. We've got the Mayor of London here for a while, and then we'll do some proper radio. No offence, Sadiq Khan. And then
I'm leaving now.
And then it's Mystery Hour.
You sound like Liz Truss. You're so anti-London. What's the matter?
Anti-growth, anti-Khan.
I'm a South Londoner. I'm a South Londoner.
What does she mean when she talks about North London? Why has that become a political pejorative? You've been around a bit longer than I have.
I think it's a caricature
that
they're trying to paint across the country, particularly in the red wall seats, about the elite, the metropolitan elite, North Londoners, podcasters even.
Podcasters, yes, you've become a podcaster recently.
Who go to BBC studios to criticise the government. I mean, well, you and I both know it's nonsense. But what it does, though, it plays into a feeling people have, which is felt in London as well, that those in the positions of power and influence are disconnected to the masses. And she's playing to this stereotype. And by the way, this is...
But in Doncaster, no one's going to specify between North London and South London. I think Jess Phillips made this point on Twitter.
Well, yes and no. Where's Keir Starmer from? North London.
Oh, I see.
And so you can...
It's not, but he lives there.
It's very subtle what they're trying to do. And it's pitting one community, one part of the country against each other. And it's very dangerous.
Indeed. You may have gathered the Mayor of London is in the house. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to put any question you want to him. I don't know. I see the first caller is in Peterborough, so that's encouraging. But I am getting a few quibbles about being too London-centric now that our audience is marching up and down the United Kingdom. How are we going to address this, you and me? How are we going to... I mean, can we? Should we? Or do we just have to focus on your brief?
Well, I'm very happy, as you know. I never refuse or duck a call because they're not a voter. We are the capital city. I'd make this point in a gentle way. I think it's patriotic to support your capital city. We are the centre for jobs, growth and prosperity, but we support other parts of the country. We haven't got the engineers to build the trains that run on the Elizabeth line. We've not got the expertise to make the electric taxis running across our city, or the specialism to build the hydrogen electric buses. So we need the rest of the country to do well, as indeed they want us to do well as well.
And of course, you remain, for the time being, the most powerful Labour politician in the country, aren't you?
Well, listen, let's look forward to a general election and hope that the government gives the British public the choice of a fresh start, and I'm looking forward to Keir Starmer being the next Prime Minister.
What do you do when the party's got a 25% average poll lead right across the board, 33% being the biggest that we've seen? How does Keir Starmer deal with that? How does he manage expectations or keep the exuberance or the triumphalism down?
I spoke to Keir very recently on this issue. He's the least complacent person you will find, number one. Number two, the only poll that really counts is the general election. What's important is we continue to hold the government to account, but also set out our vision of an alternative world where there's a Labour government having good growth, supporting families, addressing the issues that families face, rather than looking after the few.
Once again, 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. Olsen thinks he's been clever. He says, remind your listeners what the L in LBC stands for. Well, I will. It stands for leading. Actually, leading Britain's conversation.
I think that person showing his age, by the way, because I remember what it used to stand for as well.
I've still got it on a milk bottle. I've got a Snap, Crackle and Pop milk bottle at home. I keep my daffodils in it. Shall we hit the phones?
The first caller is from Peterborough, and it's Rebecca. Good morning, Rebecca.
Morning, hi. I really just want to know what's happening with the Metropolitan Police. We hear that they're on special measures, but what does that really mean? Because I think that feeling of kind of fear around what's happening with them and their kind of behaviours and actions spreads through the country. And we just want to know what's happening.
Rebecca, thanks for your call. There are 7 police forces around the country in special measures, the Met Police being one of them. It's the first time ever there's been so many police forces in special measures. And I think it shows that, austerity, which was a choice, has consequences in relation to not just fewer police officers addressing the issues we care about, but standards falling way, way short. The culture being one that's not conducive to good policing. Just to reassure you, because I know you care about policing across the country, not just London and Peterborough, is the good news in London is we now have a commissioner that's a reforming commissioner, understands the challenges, but also understands the link. The more trust and confidence in policing, the less crime. And you may not know this, Rebecca, but in the last 24 hours, a story is broken about another example of a culture of overt racism, sexism, misogyny and the like. And what Londoners will see is a difference in response from this commissioner who's not in denial, who's not being defensive, versus the previous one. And that's one of the reasons why I lost confidence in her.
Are you talking about the ex-Met Police officer now working at the Home Office and this WhatsApp group that has, and some Met Police whistleblowers? Let me provide some details. Newsnight broke this story last night. Dozens of messages, all shared within a group chat. Many images are racist and too offensive for the television programme to show last night. Some contain the very strongest racial slurs. There are jokes or posts referencing the government's Rwanda policy, the stuff, of course, of Suella Braverman's dreams. Others joke about recent flooding in Pakistan, which left almost 1,700 people dead. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex also feature in several memes alongside racist language. And several members of this group used to work for the Diplomatic Protection Group, which, of course, guards the Houses of Parliament and protects ministers. The line I draw your attention to, if I may, and thank you for asking this question, Rebecca. I'm keen to know next what happens, how you get out of special measures. But before we get on to that, here's a serving officer who spoke to the BBC on condition of anonymity. I do not think these behaviours and ideologies can be removed from the Met. Do you?
I do, but listen, you and I were here 2 months ago. I was being called out by the Met Police Federation chair. I was being called out by the former Prime Minister, the former Home Secretary, the former Police Minister, Tom Windsor, who used to run the Chief Inspectorate, and of course the former Commissioner. Whereas on the other side you had women and girls, black Londoners, LGBTQ plus Londoners, ethnic minority Londoners, and me appalled by this culture. I think you can address this culture with the right leadership at the top. First, you've got to recognise there's a problem and then take steps to address that. And Rebecca, your question about special measures I'm meeting with the HMI next week with the Commissioner to set out our plans, the Met Police's plans and our plans, how we come out of special measures. Sir Mark Rowley has said he'd like us to be out of special measures in the next 12 to 18 months. I support him in that. And that means root and branch change. Just so you know, Rebecca, there's going to be further probable bad news in the next few weeks with Dame Louise Casey publishing her interim report about what she's found. I asked her, to look into the standards and culture, persuaded the former commissioner, to do so. And I'm afraid her report may well be sober reading for those who are still in denial about the scale of the problem. And I'm somebody who's pro-police, Rebecca.
Who is in denial then? Because the new commissioner has said, I have taken over as the leader of an organisation that has been far too weak in taking on those who undermine the honest and dedicated majority. It's a fairly blatant swing at Cressida Dick, that, isn't it?
And those around her, and the chairman of the Police Federation, and Tom Windsor, and Boris Johnson, and Priti Patel, and Kit Malthouse, and many, many others. And this is some of the things we've been up against.
Well, they criticised you for the method in which you got...
No, that's not what the Police Federation chair said, if you remember.
Go on.
That they were supporting unequivocally how popular
you're quite right.
and how well-liked... when you're a leader, it's not just about being the most popular person in the room. It's about making tough decisions. And I think Sir Mark has shown in the last 3 weeks, he can make those tough decisions. At the same time as getting core policing right. He's the commissioner, by the way, who said the police should be responding to all burglaries. And also, I want to thank all those police officers, with Sir Mark's help, who made sure the Queen's funeral passed so successfully.
Yeah, I mean, it's
safely.
a tough job, isn't it? Because you're only going to get noticed if you mess something up. It's not unlike being a politician. What did he say in interview, or what has he done so far? Just give me the before and after. So let's imagine a scenario in which some police officers are found to have been involved in a disgusting WhatsApp group. What happened under the last regime, and what's going to happen under the new regime?
So the culture that Sir Mark is trying to engender, which I fully support, is not to be a passive bystander, but to be an active bystander. So you have the confidence to challenge bad behaviour, bad language and so forth, but also to report it as well, having confidence that something will happen. And one of the things that's most upsetting about the Newsnight story you referred to is the lack of confidence an appalled police officer had in the system.
27 years service,
this.
And he didn't. Yeah. He went to the BBC because he didn't have faith in the Met or professional standards.
And that's what Sir Mark's trying to change. This culture where people will feel that if they report things that are wrong, action will be taken, because, who you're letting down, not just the public, but you're letting down the decent, dedicated, brave officers who want to do right, who aren't racist, sexist, misogynistic and so forth.
So that's the key thing to do, is to give people the confidence to come forward, that they won't become pariahs in their own canteen, or they won't...
The phrase that used to exist when I was a practicing lawyer was canteen culture. the idea where certain banter took place in the canteen, it was acceptable. You go to a pub after work and a police officer will be using this sort of inappropriate language and behaviour, and that affected the way they policed. We see some of that now in WhatsApp groups. But we've got to give police officers the confidence to challenge that. But to make it clear, if you're thinking about joining the police service, if you're thinking about staying in the police service, there's a zero tolerance towards this sort of stuff.
And how do they get out of special measures? What are you looking at? Who makes the decision?
Yeah,
and what will it be based on?
So the good news here, and this should be reassuring to the British public, is it's not the police marking their own homework. So the police inspectorate, the HMI, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, have set out a number of concerns they've got. They will meet regularly. They're not simply throwing the police to the wolves. They'll meet regularly with the senior team in the Met Police Service, myself and others, over the course of the next period to see what changes we've made. And it's for Her Majesty's Inspectorate to be reassured and persuaded before we come out with special measures. And I think that's reassuring to not just Londoners, but the other 6 police forces around the country who are also in special measures.
I will be ruthless in rooting out those corrupting officers and staff, including racists and misogynists, from our organisation. He's come out all guns firing, hasn't he?
Well, listen, because he's passionate. He's somebody who left the police service for 4 years, has chosen to come back to the toughest job in policing because he's so passionate about getting policing right. But also him and his deputy, Len Owens, they're heartbroken that a profession they joined, a vocation they had, public servants, has been, generalised as being all bad.
Yeah.
It's not all bad, but there is a culture, there are systems in place that need to be changed, and I think Sir Mark's the Reforming Commissioner who's going to take big steps to address that.
Watch this space. Before we go to the next call, Rebecca, thank you. I've got a slightly odd request. Why can't zip cards for school children be on their phones?
I'm not sure what you mean in relation to using buses and stuff.
Yeah. Like you can use your phone to get through the tube and to pay for your bus fare. Kids have plastic cards that they lose all the time. I've been asked by a 14-year-old to ask you why you can't introduce technology that lets them do it on their phones.
Often when I'm on Speak to Sadiq, there's these cracking ideas which I've not got an answer to.
Usually mine.
No, I mean, it's not the 14-year-olds, to be fair, James. I mean, the good ones tend to come from your listeners. But can I take that away? Because it's a cracking... It doesn't. I don't see why you can't.
It's a brilliant idea, right?
Yeah. But also it deals with fraud and stuff. Because the big issue that used to exist was somebody's Oyster card gets stolen. That's why you had the photo with the Oyster card, because it's really important to do so. And also you don't want people losing 7 Oyster cards in a week. So a phone is personal to the child. So I don't see
the technology exists because you can do it with lots of. Anyway, I'll leave that with you.
Yeah. Well, talking of technology, we're launching today for the first time e-bikes. The Santander cycle hire scheme. So we'll have 500 across London. A good example of technology assisting those who may be less fit or have to cycle up hills.
Yes.
So it's the same price as a bus fare, 30 minutes, and 500 across London, 800 docking stations. Download the app. You'll see which docking stations have the e-bikes.
Back to the phones.
The next caller, thanks, Rebecca. The next caller is from Twickenham, and it's Rajdev. Good morning, Rajdev.
Oh, I just have to point. Hang on, Rajdev. It's His Majesty's Inspectorate now. We both said her.
Yeah. Apologies to King Charles III.
He will be listening. He never misses Speak to Sadiq.
Apologies, Your Majesty. Rajdev.
In light of 2021 being recorded as the year featuring the most teenage homicides in London, largely due to knife crime, I'm really asking the Mayor that a question he's probably been asked every year. What does he expect to do to try and reduce this phenomenon? And that's in light also of, in the last couple of weeks, a police officer being stabbed in Leicester Square. What is he going to do about the culture of knife carrying and knife crime in London?
I think you've been asked this every month that you've come into the studio, and things have they got better? Thank you, Rajdev.
Yeah, Rajdev, this is a very important question, Rajdev. I mean, this is the issue that keeps me up at night time. It has for the last 6 years since I've been Mayor. One of the things that we did some years ago was to use business rates, revenues and increased council tax to invest in young people, what we call dealing with the causes of crime. The public health approach that you may have seen used in Glasgow. And there is good news, Rajdev, no complacency at all. I met yesterday a bereaved auntie whose niece had been murdered recently, and I regularly meet bereaved families. both as an MP and as the mayor. So because of the public health approach, it basically means, Rajda, giving young people constructive things to do after school, weekends, in holidays, having role models and mentors, invested in youth clubs that have been decimated over the last 12 years, rather than just having all the eggs in the tough and crime basket, important though it is. Over the course of the last 9 months, the sobering good news is we've reduced by 68% the number of teenage homicides. To give you an idea, this time last year, if you and I were speaking, Rajdev, we'd be talking about, I'm afraid, 2023 teenage homicides. This year, although it's 11 too many, that's a big reduction. And also what we're doing is making sure the police have the support they need, 1,300 more police officers. And if I was speaking to you in 2016 compared to now, we have seen a reduction in knife crime, a reduction in knife crime injuries for those below the age of 25, a reduction in burglary and gun crime, but it's still too high. And that's why I made this point in answer to a previous caller, Rebecca, in relation to policing and them being in special measures. Austerity has consequences, right? If you've got few police officers, you've got less youth clubs, fewer youth workers, less things for young people to do, deprivation going up without excusing criminality. That's one of the reasons why it's gone up across the country. And in London, we're bucking the national trend.
What did they do in Glasgow specifically?
So what the public health approach means basically is think about crime as a health illness. So when there's an infection, you deal with the infection, you stop it spreading, but you stop it occurring in the first place. And they relied upon data. In Glasgow, there was a different issue. It was drugs and alcohol. But the key issue was to stop crime occurring in the first place, prevention using data. All that means is we look at young people and what's called adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. If a child has seen abuse at home, if they're in danger of being excluded from school, if somebody in their family is being the victim of crime and so forth, intervene early doors rather than later on. Simple examples we've invested in, youth workers in A&Es. Often 70% of those arrested for murder have themselves been the victim of crime. Is there a teachable moment or a reachable moment where you can have a youth worker in an A&E or a police station or elsewhere to try and turn that young person's life around? And in Glasgow, it took them 10 years. We've managed to make big progress in just 6 years. But it's that long-term investment. And to give credit to the SNP, it's really important. Labour started it, and what Nicola Sturgeon or Alex Salmond could have done was ditch it, but they carried on with this. And that sustained continuum has led to the big reduction in Glasgow.
Worth mentioning, I don't think any Scottish police forces are in special measures either, are they?
Different regime. Yeah. Police Scotland has. Police Scotland is one police force now, rather than numbers. We've got 43 in England and Wales.
Another call. Thank you, Rajdev.
Thank you very much, Rajdev. The next caller is from Wellingborough, and it's Kevin. Morning, Kevin.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm not bad, Well, it depends what question you ask, Kevin. But until this call, I'm okay, Good to speak to you.
No, it's not a bad question. It kind of follows on from the last one, to be honest. How do you personally feel that the Conservative Party constantly attack you on the figures of knife crime and crime within London, even though the figures are higher in the West Midlands, where there's a Conservative mayor, but they gave him nothing but praise this week?
I mean, thanks for your question, Kevin. Just checking.
Is he statistically correct?
Yeah, correct. He is. Right. Yeah, we've bucked Kevin's spot on. So in London, we've bucked the national trend because of the public health approach and because of our investment. So Kevin, I don't mind at all being criticised on policy and based upon the facts. What annoys me is misinformation, often from the Tories, which is then written up by sympathetic journalists, misinforms the public, and then they're not just based on lies, but then there's lots of hatred towards me. I'll give you an example linked with the story you talk about in relation to the misinformation about crime. So a couple of weeks ago, just over a week ago, a conservative sympathetic newspaper wrote a story that's completely untrue, saying I've said no to a statue of Her Majesty the Queen in Trafalgar Square.
Which paper was it? You can say so.
There was, I think, the Telegraph, right. Maybe in the Times.
Okay.
Completely untrue. That Sadiq Khan is blocking a statue of Queen Elizabeth II on the 4th plinth. As a direct consequence of that untrue story, the amount of racist and abusive hatred directed at me shot through the roof. It's already bad enough. Now, that story is not true, yet it's generated a number of people, having racist, abusive social media towards me, which has an impact on somebody then deciding to incite hatred against me and or wishing to cause me harm. And there are other examples, Kevin, where this happens. And I think sometimes they know what they're doing. So Liz Truss must know, she's an intelligent woman, that actually in London we've bucked the national trend. Knife crime is down, knife crime with injury is down, burglary is down, gun crime is down, no complacency at all compared and contrast to other parts of the country. You've seen the horrible murders. You mentioned West Midlands, you mentioned Liverpool. We saw what happened yesterday, that's reported in the paper elsewhere in the country. They don't talk about that, do they? And these cheap shots, if I was being unfair, I'd say it's unpatriotic, right? Because you're anti-London, you're talking down London at a time where the government relies upon growth. And so the key thing, Kevin, is for me to explain what's really happening, for Londoners to know what's happening. They see for themselves the additional police officers. They see for themselves the new youth clubs opened up because of our investment, the brilliant work done by youth workers, councils, charities, and others. And that's why it's really important. One of the reasons I come on to speak to Sadiq here is to tell the other side of the story, because you've got to be in the pitch to tell the other side of the story.
Are we going? This is a slightly odd follow-on question, but you've raised it. Are we going to have a statue of the late Queen? Anyway?
So it's something we consult the royal household about and the government. By the way,
it would be odd to put her on the fourth place anyway, because
can I say this?
she'd be junior.
Had I said, you know what, let's have a statue of Queen Elizabeth II on the fourth plinth, I tell you what, these haters would say, why has she been demoted to the back? Why is Nelson bigger than Queen Elizabeth II?
Yeah, she's a much more important monarch than George IV.
Right.
Why is he on the other plinth?
I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't.
Yeah.
And so that's a good example of sort of sliding doors parallel universe where, to some people, I can't do anything good.
And as you remind us, the repercussions are pretty serious. It still washes. Are you part of the anti-growth coalition?
Well, but can I just say, on a serious note, Rachel Reeves became Shadow Chancellor, I think, just over 2 years ago. She can't speak a sentence without mentioning the word growth. I mean, Keir Starmer, earlier in this summer, said that his three priorities are growth, growth, growth. And so what Liz Truss has done is quite smart politics, stolen our language of growth. But, it's like a game to them. These are people, livelihoods being affected by these games. Mortgages going up, rent going up, food going up, energy prices going up. I'm for growth. I've been talking about good growth for a number of years. Good growth means people getting the London living wage. Good growth means investing in skills, investing in future-proof jobs, green, digital, creative industries, construction, health, social care. So I'm the opposite of anti-growth. I'm pro-growth. It's got to be the right sort of growth. And actually, you don't get growth by being anti-London. And that's why I'm hoping Liz Truss and her team understand the importance of not doing down our capital city.
What are we going to do about Brexit? Because there's something fundamentally ridiculous about a government claiming to be all about growth when they have deliberately dragged the country out of the single market. And the OBR suggests that's a 4% hit to GDP, minimum, more than COVID, more than coronavirus. So how many people are keen for those of us who knew what was going to happen to stop talking about it.
But if you park for a second, the EU, let's accept we left the EU because it's clearly a fact we have. Actually, if your obsession is growth, the easiest way, the quickest way to get growth is to join the single market. Right? You're still outside the EU, but by joining the single market, you increase growth almost overnight. And by the way, what does it do to the confidence of the markets? It boosts it. So let's not pretend that the government's, concerned about growth because they're really concerned about growth. It's an ideological game they're playing, saying, you're either with us, and by the way, only our policies will lead to growth, and if you don't agree with our policies, you're anti-growth. It's a caricature, and it's this, what we call in politics a dividing line that you try and portray. And so anybody who's not for my policies is anti-growth, anti my policies. And by the way, who's in this hodgepodge of people? XR, North Londoners, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, Greens, anybody basically who's not part of the 19%.
Who's not in it?
Well, basically anybody who's not part of the 19% who currently support the Tory party, right? Isn't it?
Right.
And you mentioned in the intro to this programme, it seems like everybody's you're either with us or you're against us in relation to being growth or anti-growth. And the problem is, they then say you're talking down the country. They then say you're talking down our businesses when what you're doing is calling out some of the consequences of Brexit. And my point about Brexit is this. Actually, look to see who's trying to make Brexit a success. It's us Remainers, by the way, who try to make Brexit a success.
It was always going to be.
Not Jacob Rees-Mogg or Boris Johnson or those others, Michael Gove, who have vacated the pitch now. It's those who said this would happen who are now trying our very best to make it work and to criticise the government of Ireland who have been proved right in relation to the sensitivity of the Good Friday Agreement, the importance of not having borders between North and South, the fragility of peace, just beggars belief.
27 minutes after 10 is the time. Should we take another call?
The next caller.
Before we do that, I do remember Gary Burton reminds us that you would go for weeks on end, particularly during the coronavirus, without having any contact with Downing Street. Do you expect that to change with the new incumbent?
I do. I'll tell you why. Because you've got to take people at face value. Liz Truss, Kwasi Kwarteng, Simon Clarke and the others are saying they want growth. You will not get growth of 2.5% or anywhere near it in the next 2 years without working with the capital city. That includes working with me. I speak to businesses, I speak to families every day. They want to support the growth initiative, and that means working with us. And I'm hoping things change. And just to reassure listeners, I've already spoken to Simon Clarke, who's the Secretary of State for Levelling Up, and I'm hoping that leads to a better relationship with this.
Even though you're
last knot.
Clearly a fully paid up member of the anti-growth coalition.
I mean, the knockabout stuff happens at party conference. I'm hoping it's just knockabout stuff because Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng, need to work with us. We need to work with them. Put aside the silly stuff and let's make sure we support families rather than throw them under a bus. I just been asked to clarify something when you were criticising. Can you clarify that you were referring to Ken Marsh, the chair of the Metropolitan Police Federation, rather than Steve Hartshorn, Absolutely.
The chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales?
Absolutely. Apologies to Steve. Yeah, I definitely wasn't talking about Ken Marsh.
Back to the phones.
The next caller is from South London. It's Bromley and it's Paul. Good morning, Paul.
Good morning, Mayor. Good morning, James. Hope you're both well.
Thank you, mate.
My question is to do with rent caps and such alike. I'm a broker, and obviously with what's happened in the past few weeks, rates are getting completely out of hand. With that in mind, and obviously interest rates going up, and if you've got a professional landlord, which is their business rather than an accidental landlord, with the rates going up, and if a rent cap was put in place, how would you mitigate the algorithm between what they've got to now lay out with sort of rates being 7%, 8%, 9% compared to what they were with the rent cap? Now, and I get the rent cap. I grew up on the Stonebridge Park estate when it was a horrendous place with putting 50p in the meter for gas, and my mum and dad struggling. So I get that side of it. But with the rates being what they are and going up exponentially, with the income potentially coming in and then that being capped, how would you get around that? Because my brain works like an algorithm, and sometimes you can look at the figures and they just don't stack.
Well,
so how would you look at it?
Sure. Paul, thanks for your question. Firstly, where have you been for the last 6 years when interest rates weren't 6%? Right? So it's funny how suddenly those who have always been against rent controls and against rent freezes are now saying, aha, look, interest rates are now 6%. By the way, because of the government's mini budget. And as a consequence, you can't have rent controls. Well, I make a number of points in a polite, courteous way. Firstly, over the last 6 years, many landlords have made big profits, right? Because interest rates are 0%, 0.25%, 0.5%. And so the revenues coming in from the rents has far exceeded the amount they're paying in relation to mortgages. That's assuming we're talking about those who have one or two properties and are, inverted commas, amateur landlords. You and I both know, because you're a broker, there are many professional landlords who own hundreds of properties who are making massive, massive profits, aside from the build-to-rent market. So that's the first point. The second point is what I'm asking the government to do in the short term to help families during the cost of living crisis is to freeze rents for 2 years. That will save the average family £3,000. 2.4 million Londoners are currently renting, and that avoids families having to either travel 2 hours to get to school each day to take their kids to school because they've moved out of London, but also families having to be rehoused every 6 months. But in the medium term, what the government's got to do is devolve powers to me so I can set up what's called a private renters commission to work with people like you, landlords, renters and others to come up with a system that doesn't affect the supply chain. And so what I'm not saying, Paul, is give me the powers to do rent controls from today. I'm saying give me the powers today to freeze rents. Then give me the powers to set up a commission to work with brokers and landlords and others to make sure the supply chain keeps going. But we continue to have a situation where, because in the short and medium term, we're simply not going to meet the demand of housing, we try and keep the rental market at a level where people can afford to live in London. And by the way, Paul, if I was speaking to you 6 years ago when I first became mayor, I'd be saying I'm worried about porters and cleaners who can't afford to live in London. Now it's nurses, teachers, police officers, and that's one of the reasons they live outside London and travel in, because they can't afford to live in London, and it's bad for our city.
Do you want to come back, Paul?
Yeah, money, and I get it completely, and I'm all for my history as a child makes me want to protect that. My niece works as a nurse in London, and she lives in Garston in Watford.
Gosh.
Because she can't afford. So she has to travel an hour to an hour and a half each way every day on top of a 12-hour shift. Go figure. You can't work properly like that. You can't. And as much as she says, she's tired, and it's just not. It's not good. It's not healthy for the environment. It's not healthy for the economy for the economy of health. It's just not right. You should be able to live and work in a near place. So I'm all for that. I mean, and if you set a commission up, I'll quite happily come down and
because we need
you
need your expertise. And I've never said, by the way, I announced my policy of a commission 3 years ago. I've never said, that I would do it without listening to brokers and landlords and others like you. One of the things we're doing, Paul, to help people like nurses like your nieces, we are saying when we are working with developers and councils to have genuinely affordable homes, key workers should get first dibs, because we need the key workers like nurses who did so much during the pandemic, who are travelling, as you said, an hour and a half each way to work. They're knackered when they get to work, let alone getting home, and they're spending a fortune in relation to travel as well. So the new homes that we're building, and last year we began more than any time since the 70s, we're saying not just those in the waiting list who live locally, but also key workers should have the opportunity to get that genuinely affordable housing.
Should we do one more?
I'd love to, yeah. The next caller is from Pinner, and it's Richard. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning all. Mine's a fairly simple question. When are TfL going to publish the results of the ULEZ expansion consultation?
Richard, I think it'll be later on this year. I should be getting a report next month, I think, in relation to the responses to the consultation. Just to remind those who aren't aware of this from outside London, so what I'm consulting on are plans to expand the ultra-low emission zone, because we have in London more than 4,000 premature deaths because of air pollution, many hundreds of thousands of Londoners with all sorts of health issues. And it's the poorest Londoners, least likely to own a car, who suffer the worst consequences. So I'm consulting on expanding it to all of London.
And when will it be out?
Next month. I think we're in October now, so either late October or early November. And just to remind listeners, this is not a referendum. It's a consultation, but I'll be taking on board the sort of substantive points people have been making in relation to how we can address some of the issues, concerns people may have, because it's really important that everyone in London gets the benefit of clean air, not just those in central London and inner London who currently benefit from the ULEZ.
Are you satisfied with that response, Richard?
Well, not really, because it talks about the poorest Londoners, but the poorest Londoners will be the ones who suffer, the ones who have to travel into London and paying £12.
Oh, hang on a minute. The question was when will the consultation be coming out? And we can talk about what's in it when we've seen it, can't we?
It's interesting that the consultation ended in July.
Yeah.
Why will it take until November to publish the results?
Because it's not a numbers game, Richard. It's not counting up how many people were for, how many people were against. It's not a referendum. That's what weak leaders do. It's a consultation where I've taken on board we'll be taking on board the substantive points people are making, seeing if they can be ameliorated, seeing if they can be addressed, and then responding in a substantive way to the points raised by those who have taken the time to respond to the consultation.
And with your help, Richard, we'll be all over it when the consultation is actually published. I can promise you that. I think we're done. 10:36 is the time. It's been a while since the last one. Was there a reason for that? Was there a hiatus, or did I imagine it?
No, it's just
Her Majesty's passing probably interfered with the schedule.
Actually, I beg your pardon. Yeah. We obviously things did have to change because of that, but we now have His Majesty, as you reminded me.
Yeah.
And so looking forward to seeing you more often.
See you next month. And you may have news about the zip cards.
By the way, if we decide to do it, I'm claiming
Can you name it after me?
I'm not giving you the credit.
Can't you name it after me? The JOB cards.
Nice try, yeah.
For young Londoners.
Nice try.
Thank you very much indeed, Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 10:41 is the time, and I should mention Andy Burnham is the guest, isn't he? Currently on Full Disclosure until the new episode drops tomorrow. So a couple of people asking why we don't do more with him as another mayor of a major city in England. And there's part of your answer. I mean, we should do more. We said we would do more, actually, when we finished that interview. But there's a full hour of conversation with Andy Burnham about his life, the universe and everything, available on the latest episode of my Full Disclosure series, which you can get from Global Player or wherever you download your podcasts. And speaking of podcasts, what on earth was Liz Truss talking about yesterday? You know my theory about Twitter, don't you? The reason why a certain type, and they may well change now that Elon Musk looks poised to go ahead with his purchase, people who I think, if you say sort of, who are constantly whining, but think that they're the fans of freedom, delighted about Elon Musk's plans to buy Twitter. I kind of look at that and think, why is everyone so happy? And the answer is almost every platform in this planet, and certainly in the English-speaking world, almost every platform is owned by a billionaire, usually a non-dom billionaire in the context of the British media, that then does the bidding of whoever is pulling the strings. You know, they're even setting up new television stations in this country because they don't think that 90% bias in the newspapers is enough. They need to have an even less level playing field. And Twitter is an antidote to this because it allows people to build up fairly huge followings and reach large numbers of people without any corporate sponsorship whatsoever, without having to toe any party lines or sort of commercial diktats. And who is going to be most terrified by that? Answer, the people who own newspapers, I think, or indeed perhaps these weird new television stations full of sort of anti-vax claptrap and stuff like that. But that just intrigues me, this. So that, I think, is part of the reason why Liz Truss targeted Twitter yesterday, despite being on it. And podcasts got a mention. I'm trying to remember what else was on the list. We're talking about the Anti-Growth Coalition. And what I'm going to ask you is whether or not you think it's going to work. Because how long ago did I say to you that they need to come up with a new enemy? So Johnson was an aberration from politics as usual, as we know. And although some of those aberrations persist, the absence of consequences for actions, for example, or the notion of a resignation issue left the building when Boris Johnson walked into it, some of it is going to have to return because, very simply, Liz Truss is not Boris Johnson. She's not possessed of his diabolical skill set. And one of the things that is going to have to return, because this is a Conservative government, is the targeting of a useful enemy. And by useful, I don't actually mean that it has to exist. I just mean that it has to be describable. So they can't really do immigration anymore, despite Suella Braverman's attempts to do so. They can't really do refugees, although, you know, you see Farage down in Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars, rubbing his thighs at the thought of turning up the anger dial and on various people up and down the country. But it's not going to work as an electoral measure. You're not going to be able to campaign on reducing immigration or sinking boats in the Channel if you are even vaguely aware of what our jobs figures look like. It simply, I mean, in Australia now, they're facing a genuine crisis. The shortage of young people across the planet means that soon we're going to be fighting each other, fighting for immigrants. We're going to be fighting for young people in particular to come to various countries and work and make their lives. So I don't think you can have that. You can't have the EU because we've left it, you see, as the Mayor of London reminded us just a few moments ago. You can't point at Brussels as the enemy. They might try and revivify the pig-headed, ignorant dislike of the European Court of Human Rights or even the Human Rights Act, but it's not going to get the same traction as Brussels and bureaucrats and unelected whatever's got. So you can't have immigrants, really, because we need them. You can't have Brussels or the EU, really, because we've left it. The universal credit has filleted essentially our welfare system, so you're going to really struggle to get hatred of the unemployed off the ground because they are now so poorly served. The mythical or the very rare the hen's tooth notion of a single mother of 10 living in a mansion in Maida Vale only ever made the news because it was so rare. If it was happening a lot, it wouldn't be news, would it? It would be dog bites man. But I mean, I got tired of explaining that to you 10 years ago. So we're not going to be able to do with the unemployed or the single mothers, but Liz Truss really needs a target. She really needs an enemy. She really needs a constituency of people that her supporters can be comfortably encouraged to hate. And I don't use that word lightly. We have a Home Secretary at the moment who dreams about deporting people to Rwanda, actually dreams about it, squirms with delight at the very thought of it. This is not normal. This is, another carpet-slippered creep towards genuinely fascistic circumstances. But that's not going to work either. There aren't enough refugees or asylum seekers to actually motivate a population. So who are they going to use? We can't do immigrants. We can't do refugees. We can't do Brussels. We can't do the EU. We can't do the unemployed. We can't do the single mothers. Who's left? The footballers aren't kneeling anymore at many games, or certainly it's not a requirement anymore. What? So I'll put that down. We can't have the footballers. BLM in general seems to be, I guess that would be probably still on the list, but you're not really. I think people have woken up to the fact that even Steve Baker, Brexit hard man Steve Baker, said at party conference this week that the notion that it's some sort of neo-Marxist organisation is absolute bilge. So who's she going to go for? What I want you to do now, I want you to think about your Daily Mail reading Nan. All right, or your Daily Mail reading Dad. It doesn't actually have to be the Daily Mail. They might just get all their news off Uncle Keith's Facebook. But people who are constantly obsessing about dinghies, people whose social media is full of CCTV footage of ancient crimes being committed by people of colour, and there's no crimes or footage on there anywhere of crimes being committed by white people because they're racists. The kind of person I mean. Don't have to be a racist, but they've swallowed the Brexit stuff. They've swallowed the unemployment rhetoric. They've been encouraged to hate on Brussels or hate on immigrants or hate on refugees or hate on unemployed people. They got very cross about the kneeling footballers. And the statues. They really care about the statues, but they don't care about history because they don't think the National Trust should be publishing their history. I could go on. You get the picture. You know exactly of whom I'm speaking. There's one in your family. Is it going to work? Because Liz Truss has come up with a new enemy to replace Brussels, to replace immigrants, to replace single mothers, to replace unemployed people with flat-screen televisions. Do you remember when that was the big bête noire of the rabid right, all the angry Bigginses queuing up to attack people with flat-screen televisions, even though for about 10 years, possibly more, you haven't been able to buy a television in this country that isn't a flat screen. But anyway, she's come up with a plan. She thinks she's got it. 0345 6060973 is the number you need to tell me just simply put, whether or not you think this is going to work. Do you want to have a little listen to who is the new enemies of the people? You remember the old editor of the Daily Mail put High Court judges on the list, so we can put High Court judges. That's not really lefty lawyers they've had a crack at as well. All of these, none of them are as big as the big three, are they? Immigrants, the EU and the unemployed. If you can't have one of them in the firing line, what on earth are you going to do as a Conservative Prime Minister to fire up the base? Have a listen.
I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back.
Don't know what that is yet, but I'm going to clap anyway because, it's conference.
Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP. The militant unions, the vested interests dressed up as think tanks.
Hey?
The talking heads, the Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier.
Talking heads, Brexit deniers. What's a Brexit denier?
The fact is...
Hang on, the fact is... What was the last one? Exile. Labour.
They prefer protesting to doing.
Who do?
They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions.
I've seen this speech on Twitter.
They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo.
Who is she talking about there specifically? North London townhouses, down with that sort of thing, to BBC studios.
From broadcast to podcast,
hello,
they peddle the same old answers.
Hey?
It's always more taxes,
no, don't clap.
More regulation and more meddling.
Has anyone ever come across a podcast calling for more taxes?
Wrong.
Have you ever come across a podcast calling for more taxes? Should we do that again? Should we try that again? The phone lines are open, by the way. Is this going to work, is the question. I genuinely don't know. I hope not, obviously, but I hope that all the previous ones wouldn't work. I hope that all the lies about the European Union wouldn't work, but they did and we left it. I hope that all the lies about immigrants wouldn't work, but they did and they left. I hope that all the lies about unemployed people wouldn't work, but they did. And our welfare state got absolutely kebabbed under so-called austerity. So 0345 60 973 is the number you need to answer the question of whether or not this is going to work. Let's just run through it again, because I got a bit lost. Did she mention Hugh Grant? Oh, no, High Court. Sorry, I can't read my own writing. High Court judges. I don't think they got a mention. So here it is. Here are the new, get your tenses right, O'Brien. Here are the new enemies of the people.
I will not allow the anti-growth coalition to hold us back.
OK. All right, Reverend, pay attention now. Let's get all this written down. Who's in it, Liz? Who's in the anti-growth coalition? In your own time.
Labour, the Lib Dems, the SNP.
Well, that's everyone else.
The militant unions.
The
vested interests dressed up as think tanks.
But Downing Street's full of
talking
people
heads,
from
the
think tanks.
Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, and some of the people we had in the hall earlier.
Brexit deniers. And two very pleasant-looking ladies who held up a banner about fracking. Down with that sort of thing. OK, what's the fact?
They prefer protesting to doing. They prefer talking on Twitter to taking tough decisions. They taxi from North London townhouses to the BBC studio to dismiss anyone challenging the status quo.
12 years in power, you are the status quo, aren't you? Aren't you, though? No?
From broadcast to podcast,
that's me.
They peddle the same old answers. It's always
never
more
listen to Mystery Hour.
taxes, more regulation, and more meddling.
More taxes, more regulation, and more meddling.
Wrong.
Wrong. Is it going to work? 0345 6060 973. And who does she like? So we've got Labour, the Liberal Democrats, and the SNP. She sat in a cabinet, of course, that was in coalition with the Liberal Democrats, and indeed she used to be in it, didn't she? She used to be in the Liberal Democrats back when she was calling for the monarchy to be abolished. So all politicians except, you can't say except the Conservatives, because quite a lot of the Conservatives have turned on her as well and are objecting to quite a lot of her policies. So but just most politicians, almost all politicians, it's probably quite a popular line now until you remember that she is one herself. Militant unions. Well, that just means unions that have some sort of agency, does it? Militant. How can you tell whether a union is militant or not? Answer, well, can it take meaningful action to protect its members' rights? Yes, it can. Oh, it's militant then. Talking heads. I take that a bit personally, actually. I've got to be honest with you. Do you think she's talking about me, Keith? No? She doesn't know who I am, he said. Talking heads, podcasts and broadcasts. Come on, I don't live in North London, but I've got a house. Is it a townhouse? I don't know. What's a townhouse? North London townhouses. Why is that a pejorative? What is it about North London that is supposed to upset the audience at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham? Is she going to boycott the BBC now? I didn't understand that. Or is she just not going to get a car when she goes there? She'll go on a pogo stick or something. Broadcast and podcast. More tax. Where are these podcasts calling for more taxes, more meddling and more regulation? I haven't heard any. I haven't heard any of them. I'm listening to a very good podcast at the moment, Gabriel Gatehouse, looking into the origins of the January the 6th coup attempt in America and the whole QAnon thing. I'm pretty sure he hasn't called for any higher taxes. Have you been listening to the new podcast News Agents with Emily and John and Lewis? It's very, very good, but I haven't heard it calling for more meddling yet. Where are these podcasts that are calling for more meddling, do you think? Or more taxes or more regulation? The two protesters in Birmingham were almost in twin set and pearls. I mean, they'd clearly dressed very much for the role. Like geniuses, they had two banners. So some bozo comes along and rips the first banner out of their hand, and cool as you like, they just took another banner out. Very calm, very measured. They were just reminding Liz Truss that in 2019 she campaigned on a manifesto that pledged there wouldn't be any fracking anywhere in this country without local approval. And they seem to be reverse ferreting from that position. So put on the list people who remind Tories of their own manifesto reminders, down with that sort of thing. What's a Brexit denier, do you think? Someone who says that Brexit hasn't happened yet? I mean, they're not generally in the category of people that the rest of this list includes, are they? People who say that Brexit hasn't happened yet, there hasn't been a real Brexit. My unicorn hasn't arrived, for example. I don't know. What would a Brexit denier? What is a Brexit denier? There has been no Brexit? I don't understand. But anyway, down with them. Twitter, I told you why they hate Twitter. They hate Twitter because they can't control it. I think it really is that simple. And because relatively articulate people who are not sponsored by press barons can achieve quite high followings, quite large followings. You'd be amazed what sort of Flotsam and Jetsam have got up to 1 million followers in recent weeks. Broadcasts and podcasts. So down with words, is it? Words? People who speak? Talking heads? People who speak? The think tanks. Downing Street is full of people from think tanks. The ones that I think she likes are the ones that are secretly funded, right? So down with think tanks who have transparent funding. We don't want any of that sort of thing. So, right, Labour, Lib Dems, SNP, unions, people who talk, Brexit deniers, Extinction Rebellion, people who remind Conservatives about the contents of the last Conservative manifesto, people on Twitter, but not obviously the people on Twitter who are Conservatives, like Liz Truss, people who appear on the BBC, but obviously not including Liz Truss and other Conservative politicians, people with broadcasts and podcasts about more taxes, more regulation and more meddling, i.e. nobody, so she just must have a problem with podcasts in general. It's probably because she's the only person in the country that hasn't got one. Even Sadiq Khan's got one now. Clear the air. Well worth a listen. And that's all. Is that everything, do you think? So here's the plan. I will persuade the British people that most of the politicians, the unions, everyone on the telly, Brexit deniers, environmental campaigners, people who remind Conservatives of the contents of their last manifesto, people with too many followers on Twitter, people who appear on the BBC, people with podcasts or jobs in broadcasting. She didn't mention newspaper journalists. I wonder why that would be. And people who want higher taxes, higher regulation and higher meddling. No, I don't think anyone's ever campaigned on a more meddling ticket. I don't think it would work. What do we want? More meddling. When do we want it now? I can't quite see that kicking off. All of those things are supposed to enrage your Daily Mail reading dad. Okay? Do you think it's going to work? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. It's a very, very simple question. You look at your Daily Mail reading dad or mum. I know your mum says she only gets it for the TV guide on a Saturday, but she has changed her views about an awful lot of things since it started dropping through the letterbox every morning. When you look at your Daily Mail reading mum or dad and you remember how they were successfully persuaded to hate immigrants, to hate refugees, to hate Brussels, to hate the European Union, to hate unemployed people, to hate footballers taking the knee, to hate Black Lives Matter, to hate High Court judges, to hate Remainers doing their democratic duty in the House of Commons, you know, they were persuaded to hate all of these people. Is the new invitation to hate going to work? Is the anti-growth coalition going to successfully assume the role of the new enemies of the people? And Jamie Oliver is on the list as well, apparently. The Prime Minister's spokesman yesterday refused to confirm or deny that Jamie Oliver was part of the anti-growth coalition because of his tireless campaigning to help children get healthier or stay healthy or be healthy. I mean, down with healthy children. Flipping meddling Oliver with your obsession with healthy children, honestly. Down with that sort of thing. So 3 minutes after 11, what's it called? The Anti-Growth Coalition. Very obvious, and I'd forgotten Sadiq Khan talked about it in Speak to Sadiq this morning, but a little reminder there in Dominic's news bulletin. It's a very obvious and transparent political ploy, but that doesn't mean it won't work. Will it work? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Jamie's in Church Stretton in Shropshire. We'll start there, I think. It's not that Jamie, is it?
Well, that Jamie, yes, it is. Yes,
hello. Oh, good.
Hello, James. I'm rather sorry for you, actually. After all that lot, you didn't even get a mention. I mean, by the time they've got
she did. I come off it. Podcaster and broadcaster.
Yeah, well,
talking head and Twitter. This is basically my day. That's it. I mean, I do most days I do a broadcast and then I do a podcast and then I spend a couple of hours on Twitter. She might as well have held up a picture of me, Jamie. What are you talking about?
I suppose then that does put you just above the people who don't pick up their dog poo and they're parking the wrong place in Church Stretton High Street.
Something like that.
I suppose. But, I mean, actually, it was such a bizarre blunderbuss of a "we hate everybody."
Yes.
That I actually, as I said to your researcher, I was listening. I was watching the speech because it was going to be quite interesting, really,
Yes.
wasn't it? And it started off, and I thought this is going quite well, really. And,
Yes.
and there was quite a placatory tone, and she was talking about her background, like you expect. And then suddenly, halfway through, I think another speechwriter took over.
Okay.
They've got lots of young men who write in these things. And as I said, it's almost as if Steve Bannon came in and said, "Hey, come on, where's your victims? You've got to go for somebody before you're finished."
Yes.
And so they picked up the bit that said, "We're going to go for these." I mean, growth is anyway such a tenuous notion that it's very difficult for your average Daily Mail reader to cope with.
She's trying to turn anti-growth into anti-me, isn't she?
Yeah, anyone who's not on our side is a complete pain. I mean, you'll be wanting to ride the water next, won't you? And I think it's also designed for those people. We have to remember this: those people who really don't think much about politics, and there's vast numbers of them. It's like the bloke who said he voted for Brexit just to see what would happen.
Yes.
And I could have hit him. He's found out now.
Well, no, maybe not. He might be a Brexit denier. What's a Brexit denier now that you've brought the B word in? What does she mean when she says a Brexit denier?
Well, obviously, somebody who suggests that it might not have been a complete, total success.
Brexit brilliance denier. They're denying the brilliance of Brexit by doing things like really annoying things like counting.
Well,
or pointing at businesses going bust, or looking at export figures, or OBR forecasts on what's going to happen to GDP. Those are the Brexit deniers. The Brexit deniers are the reality addicts. I'm putting that on the list. Reality addicts. And final question: is it going to work? This is because we can take the mickey out of it all we want. This kind of politicking has worked in recent years.
It will work with some people who don't think much about it at all, and it might hang on for a bit. But I think it was such a wide blunderbuss that it's very unlikely to stick.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? There's not enough focus. I don't know if there's enough focus, and certainly including people who remind Conservative politicians of the contents of the 2019 Conservative manifesto, like the two very mild-mannered protesters in the hall in Birmingham yesterday, is quite a reach. Thank you, Jamie. Christine is in Windsor. Christine, is it going to work?
No, in one word.
Why not?
Because that speech that she gave is an absolute disgrace to her country, her people. She disrespected everybody and blamed everybody except herself. The union, SNP, Labour Party, all of it,
Yes, Twitter, podcasters, broadcasters, Brexit deniers, talking heads.
Yeah. But she did not address the economy or policies or regulations.
Well, she did. She said growth 3 times in a row. That's addressing the economy. Growth.
Yes, but our growth is flattened.
No, excuse me. Can you when you say it, can you make sure you say it 3 times? We're talking about growth. Thank you.
It's a failure of this Conservative government, and we should soon actually call a general election because we are going down the pan.
Well, she can't. She's not going to do that until we've seen all the growth. What I want to know.
We won't see any growth.
We will see growth. You just have to believe more. You're a growth denier.
We need policy. We need
clarity and leadership, Christine.
Clarity and leadership, but we don't have any of that. It's all lies, blaming people, and obfuscating the whole process of governing, and they think they'll get away with it by blaming everybody else.
It is a remarkable
responsibility.
It is a flex, isn't it, after 12 years in power to have stood up at conference and just made a long list of people that we don't like. Thank you, Christine. Beautifully put. And thank you for observing the growth rule. Danny Finkelstein, one of the most astute political commentators in the business, writes quite beautifully this morning. He says, in order to win an election, in fact, in order not to lose by a landslide, you need some people to like you. And you have to like them back. That is, it sounds like a statement of the bleeding obvious, but it's actually an incredibly pertinent point that he makes. And he was a senior advisor to John Major. I think he wrote speeches for David Cameron. He's a Tory grandee. He's in the House of Lords. But he goes on, I mean, not just a few loyal people with a Tory history or a handful of niche ideologues. Real, actual people have to like you. He goes on, yet the Tory party seems to want to be at war with as many people as it can find. It's exactly my point. Metropolitan elites, people who study golf course management in universities, young people, the Treasury, big business, people who work from home, the International Monetary Fund, the civil service, the BBC. The only people who don't think the Conservative Party is for the rich are the rich, who think the Tory party hates them. It's a brilliant piece, this. And it's a really powerful point. Who do they actually like? Who is their support now, given that the list of people they despise is growing longer every day? Anne's in Whitstable. Anne, what would you like to say?
Jamie stole my thunder a bit. I was going to help you by defining a Brexit denier.
Well, go ahead. Pretend I've said nothing. I never talk about Brexit.
It's anybody who doesn't think it was the best thing since sliced bread, and or anybody who points out the disadvantages that have arisen from it. I think those are the people that she is trying.
So she wants us. She literally. You have someone here saying, "Stop paying attention to reality. Yeah. Move on. Move on from." Where do you go when you move on from reality? Do you think?
Well, in trust land, you shake a tree and suddenly we've got 2.5% growth a year.
Yes, growth.
Yeah, sorry, growth. You've got 2.5% growth every year.
And so a Brexit denier is someone like the OBR who points out the hit to growth. Some of the Bank of England.
Yeah, absolutely.
The CBI.
Yeah, absolutely.
The hospitality sector. Haulage.
Even Tim Weatherspoon, I seem to remember not long after we'd left.
He's closed quite a lot of pubs recently, hasn't he?
Oh, even he was saying, well, I can't get bar staff. And I think it was Stefano Hatfield in the Eye pointing out, how dare they go away and not do our jobs that we don't want to do?
Yes.
And, if even he is saying, hang on, this is a problem.
So he's probably a Brexit denier as well. Who's not a Brexit denier then? Just because even, what's the chop, Suella Braverman now is saying that she doesn't like the look of this India trade deal that Liz Truss was boasting about not long ago because it might involve too many Indians coming to this country.
I think Nadine Dorries, because there was a little banner came across.
Nadine Dorries just called her cruel. Nadine Dorries just called her cruel.
In the polls, not because interest rates are rocketing and people can't afford. We're behind in the polls because we ditched Boris Johnson.
The Conservative Party faces a landslide defeat at the next election unless Liz Truss changes course, a former cabinet minister and close eye of Boris Johnson has warned.
Yeah, that's the actual bit on your banner said. Doris said, we're behind in the polls because we ditched Boris Johnson.
Yeah, well, I'm sure she thinks that.
By extension, I suspect, therefore, she isn't a Brexit denier.
No, she gets a... No, I see.
Might be all right.
But she's called her cruel. OK, so, I mean, final question, and this is perhaps the bigger challenge. Who does she like?
I don't think she likes anybody.
Who does she think she likes? She likes donors. Does she like donors?
She definitely likes donors.
Not
she
kebabs.
Definitely likes anybody who agrees with her.
Right, but no one seems to agree with her. Even her own cabinet don't agree with her.
No, I think it's a very small list of people she likes.
Well, we shall find out. Thank you, Anne. Very helpful. She likes growth. She just can't really tell us how she's going to achieve it or indeed what it is or why or how you can be committed to growth, while also having pulled the country out of the single market, which is the simplest thing you could do would be to rejoin it if you were truly prioritising growth. What about all the Tories who objected to all the Conservatives that told the chairman of the 1922 committee that they were not prepared to vote for the tax cut for the highest earners in the country? That was her own party. That was presumably a majority, or not a majority, but enough of her own party to inflict a defeat upon her own government. Hannah's in Colchester. Hannah, what is this list? Is it going to work, Hannah? Is it going to work?
Morning, James. I would say hell yeah. It is going to work with the group of people that you were saying or suggesting it would appeal to, so your Daily Mail readers or those who subscribe to that point of view. We've spent however long under Tory leadership, and as a nation we've been slowly gaslit, and we've walked through Brexit where people like, foreign people were blamed for our economic problems, and the EU were blamed for stealing money from the NHS. It's been very cleverly done, and this is another attack on anybody who may happen to have a different opinion to her. But as a nation, I think we're just going along with it now. Reverse back 2 weeks to Kwasi Kwarteng and his announcement on tax. To me, that was the biggest personal insult, financial personal insult, since the poll tax happened. And at that point, we rioted as a nation.
Yes.
No one's doing anything now.
No, but the targets that you've listed are quite clear. They're quite easy and comprehensible. I hate foreigners, but not the ones I know. The other ones, the ones on Nigel's posters or the ones I read about in the Daily Mail. I hate Brussels because it's full of unelected bureaucrats. I hate unemployed people because they've got more money than I have and they stay in bed all day. Again, not true, but easy. You can see how the cogs bite each other. You can see how the wheels turn on this. Yeah. The anti-growth coalition, you really think that's going to land?
We're all looking for someone to blame, aren't we?
Yes, but we're going to blame the government.
Well, I'd like to think so, and I'd like to think that the next time we do have a general election that there's change, and that we don't continue to vote in people who, quite frankly, don't care about what I class as anyone who's not super rich.
Even the super rich aren't happy. That Crudders character, Lord Crudders, is published a very bizarre thread on Twitter about how keen he is for Boris Johnson to be brought back. It's we are in it's a very strange period of British politics, this. Who does Liz Truss like? 03. Who does she like? No, we've tried that. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. Who she doesn't like? Everybody. Is it everybody? Are you, Keith, are you on this list? Have you got a podcast yet? You've got what? Sort of. Broadcast? Yeah, kind of. You are. You mean you work in broadcasting. Twitter? Yeah, you're on Twitter, aren't you? I'm quite big on TikTok these days. Did you know this? I knew nothing about this. I've got quite a big following on TikTok, apparently. Crikey, don't tell Liz Truss. Should just stick it on the list. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. He's on form today, young Gary. He writes, the only people Liz likes is M people. Hey, we got a lot of coverage for that yesterday. I don't know if you've seen the papers today. Chat with Mike Pickering of M people, who was in particularly high dudgeon about the deployment of his own track for Liz Truss's bizarre pre-speech shenanigans down in Birmingham. But even bizarrer, of course, was the contents of the speech. I mean, listen, I'm having some fun with this, obviously, but there's a serious question here. Well, there's several serious questions, but key to that seriousness is the question of whether or not it will work, because we should be frightened. If you think about what's happened with successful lies being successfully disseminated among the population, beginning with your Daily Mail reading Dad, but reaching much, much further than that. We've become the first country in the history of humanity to impose economic sanctions on itself. We've undertaken a course of action that is absolutely certain to attack growth, to reduce growth, which the Prime Minister continues to claim is her top priority, completely at odds with reality. We've seen an appalling demonisation of humanity, which is now being ramped up still further by Suella Braverman and her dreams of deporting refugees. You start off thinking, crikey, no one's going to fall for that. And the next thing you know, you've got a coup attempt unfolding in Washington, D.C. Or you've got Donald Trump claiming that he actually won an election that he lost. It is all part of the same process. And people choose to believe it, sometimes consciously, sometimes subconsciously. And so will this work? Will this new enemy land with the British public, with your Daily Mail reading Dad? Sarah's made me worry now. Sarah says the more airtime that you give this new slogan, anti-growth coalition, the more it cements into the minds of people who will just follow like sheep. Stop mentioning it, please. It's what they want. Do you agree with that? I don't think I agree with that. You can't not mention it. And it is also hilarious. everyone's in it. So, I mean, literally, you're being encouraged to hate yourself, I think. Oh, I don't know. But will it work is the crucial question. Mo's in Birmingham. Mo, will it work?
Hello, James.
Hello.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
It won't work. And I think the simple reason why it won't work is because it's such a vague yet abstract term.
Yes.
It just can't be defined. And to refute it, it's so easy, then you will have to then fall into the trap of saying some growth is good, yet other growth isn't good. If you're, let's say, a Labour Party member, all you need to do is just pull out a graph to say, look at this growth that the last Labour government achieved. Or if you're, let's say, a pro-EU person, you could pull out a graph and say, look at all this growth that Britain achieved while being in the EU.
Oh, yeah.
And all of a sudden, they're left to say, well...
Not that kind of growth.
You don't want that type of growth at all.
Not that sort of growth, Mo. The other sort of growth.
Yeah. And I think the phrase is a symptom, I think, of Liz Truss's, I think, relatively poor oratory and communication skills. I think the best phrases are one words. You could define an enemy by saying immigrant or Ramona. By saying a phrase that you can't quantify, that you can't actually see, is vague. And I think that dooms it to failure.
So you could encourage people to believe that Brussels or the European Union was somehow acting against their interests, and you could then conjure up all sorts of nonsense, including, of course, bendy bananas or whatever it may be. You can obviously turn people against the other in the context of immigrants or refugees. And similarly, the unemployed, because you know someone who knows someone who knows someone who knows someone. But this list, I mean, are there people out there who are animated by the thought of somebody living in a house in North London, getting in a car to the BBC? I mean, how many people are there who live in houses in North London and regularly get cars to the BBC? I just don't know. In Birmingham, is it something you talk about a lot when you're out with your peer group?
I'll be honest with you, if I'm out with my peer group, we aspire to live in a nice townhouse in London with a good job.
Yes.
Maybe with a podcast talking about good cookery or whatever else and so on.
Yeah. Down with podcasts as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you're busy, James, but I think, again, the reason why I think it's such an electoral mistake is that she is pitching herself as a purist by defining so many enemies. It is the opposite of building an electorally successful
this
coalition.
is the point that Danny.
This is
the point that Danny Finkelstein makes. Is that you need to like people, and you have to like, or you need some people to like you, and you have to like them back. And who does she like? Do you think?
And I think you just run out of people. You need to get a magic number to win seats and so on. And when you define so many enemies, and enemies that could quite possibly be the very people you live with, you work with.
Of course they are. Of course
the people you're interacting with every day.
I like your optimism.
It makes no sense.
I like your optimism, and I hope you're right. I've got two things. Nicola points out that QAnon took off, and that posited the idea of household name politicians being involved in child sacrifice and satanic worship. So I don't know that the ridiculousness of the project necessarily dooms it to failure. And the second thing is, can I ask you a slightly strange question?
Go for it.
Did you have any sense during this conversation, because when you mentioned a moment ago that I was busy, I thought that sounded a bit odd. Did you pick up at any point in this conversation, Mo, that I was stringing the conversation out for a little bit longer than perhaps you were expecting?
No, I appreciate, James, that you're a very popular radio broadcaster with
talking
a
head,
population.
talking head, Mo. It's a very popular talking head. Because I accidentally turned my switchboard off. I pressed the wrong button on the computer, and I couldn't go to another caller because I had nothing in front. Keith had to come in and fix it for me.
Well, James, I'll leave that to you, really.
So I can't believe I got away with it. I didn't, no sense at all. Actually, no, I was hanging on your every word, but I would have strung out the conversation for a little bit longer if Keith hadn't come in and just put my switchboard. So now I can see David and Bill and Chris and Austin and Anthony and everybody waiting, Malcolm waiting to talk, and Adam. We'll go to Bill, I think, in Chessington. Bill, what would you like to say? Who does she like?
Morning, Jane.
Hello, Bill.
Yeah, I've just been listening to your what you're talking about.
Good.
It's very interesting as ever, and you are on a list. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think
probably
you might,
a hit list.
I think you might be right.
But anyway, having said that, talking about Liz Truss, the trouble with Liz Truss, in my opinion, is that she's been too much around her own people. So in other words, anything she says, because she's the leader, or she was trying to become the leader, everyone's that way. So basically, they're all going to be positive to her. When she's had to go into bat against people who start to break everything down, she ain't got no answer. And she has to sort of change her tone or whatever. But the thing is, they won't. I don't think the Conservatives will ever forgive her for what happened on that Friday. And so basically, I think she's... You
mean for tanking the pound? And interest rates are still up there. That hasn't been fixed by the Bank of England's intervention.
No. I mean, the thing is, when you had her speech yesterday, she's sort of like trying to reinvent the wheel. And as I said to your researcher, I'm 70. I've heard all this before, about 10 times, and nothing's changed. So they keep asking people to follow them and all the rest of it, but they never deliver.
But who's she talking to now? Because she's not...
Well, that's what I mean.
I know, but are you part of the anti-growth coalition, do you think?
Well, I'm not for her. Let's put it that way. I say that. Because basically, whatever they say, as I said, I've heard all this before, and as you say, they try to frighten people with a load of lies.
Yes.
And that's the worst thing you can have.
I don't know that it is the same as what we've seen before, because usually I would be able to identify who it was designed to appeal to. So you would be able to, you had the striver versus skiver rhetoric. No one actually thinks they're a skiver. You only ever think someone else is a skiver, but you think you're a striver. Oh, good, she's looking after me. She's looking after strivers. She's not looking after old, what's his chops on the dirty Gertie at number 30 who hasn't done a full day's work in her life.
That's
right. So there's nothing here. Who is it appealing to? That's the bit I can't work out. That's the bit.
Well, she didn't do any of her hustings on council estates, did she?
I don't know, actually. I mean, if she's talking to Conservative members, it's unlikely that there would have been a big take-up of tickets in the places you described, but there'd be a few. I don't know. I don't know. Bill, thank you, mate. Lovely stuff. And that Friday, Black Friday, as it may well become known, will obviously hang around both her neck and the neck of the Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng for the foreseeable future. And maybe that's part of the problem that Bill's identified, is that you can't really claim you're pro-growth when you tank the pound and gave interest rates a shot in the arm. But she will keep claiming it until, I don't know. I don't know what happens. I don't know how this story ends. It's coming up to 11:30. Mystery Hour with us at 12. So if you want to contribute to this conversation, get your skates on. Very long list of enemies, a very short list of allies. And don't take my word for it. Take the word of the Conservative peer, Lord Finkelstein, who points out, in order to win an election, in fact, in order not to lose by a landslide, you need some people to like you, and you have to like them back. Yet the Tory party seems to want to be at war with as many people as it can find. I think he's just right. What do you think the plan is? Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It's 33 minutes after 11, and what or who does Liz Truss like? Who do we think who's it appealing to? And does your Daily Mail reading Dad, do you reckon he will be persuaded that the anti-growth coalition are his enemies without being entirely sure of why? 0345 6060 Ian is in Grafhamin. Oh, actually, just a quick word from Natasha, who points out that all the callers are men. When I just read out the switchboard, they were all men, Natasha, but the first three callers this hour were Christine, Anne and Hannah. So, yeah, near. Ladies first, one could almost say. 11:34 is the time. Let's go to Ian, who's in Grafham. Ian, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'm very in touch with my feminine side, if that helps.
Carry on, Ian. No, that's nice. Yeah, I can tell.
Well, no, the reason I was ringing was basically that the industry I work in, which is estate management, which is basically looking after landscapes for very, very, very wealthy people in the aristocracy.
Yeah.
When I started doing this 7 years ago,
right,
my co-workers had absolutely no interest in politics because there was always enough work for us. That has changed over the last year or so, and I've now got people who had absolutely no, they didn't even know which party was which, who now are so clued up you wouldn't believe.
That's fascinating to me. That's fascinating. Because it is simply during periods of relative prosperity. I mean, 5-7 years ago, still a bit of austerity around. But if you've got enough work, then you're not that worried about what's going on in Westminster, are you?
No, exactly. I mean, because again, until recently, it was fairly recession-proof what we do.
Right.
But now, I mean, this summer's been the worst I've ever known. I'm actually changing career because of it.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going into roadworks now.
Gosh.
Yeah, because it's just crazy. I mean, we've had them reducing our hours because they're worried about the cost of living, and I'm worried about feeding my son. You know, and they're worried about their champagne bill.